Thank you, Hari Kiran. And I would like to thank India Foundation for arranging this important workshop and dialogue. I'm coming to you from a different perspective. I am an educator in the Vedic field. I haven't been involved directly in diplomacy of any kind, but I've been very much involved in the whole spread of the Vedic knowledge, yoga, and also India's greater cultural influence over the last 30 years or more, including with educational institutions inside of India, but also with yoga groups, Vedic schools, Ayurvedic schools, healing centers really throughout the world, North America, South America, Europe, Russia, and other places. So first I want to put this in a certain perspective. India is a civilization. It is a culture or a complex of cultures. You can also say it's a nation or it's a country or it is a geographical region. For example, we don't say British civilization or French civilization or even American civilization. They are a subset of Western civilization or European civilization, we might say. So India has a civilizational power that is, I think, the greatest in the world, both in terms of spirituality through the yoga, Vedanta, Buddhism, and all of that, but also through art and culture, and even potentially, as the time goes forward, through science. And in that regard, we look at India as Bharat, and this tradition of Bharatiya Sanskriti as Indian civilization. Or we can also call it the Dharmic civilization, which is also the foundational civilization pretty much of Asia as a whole. Certainly it affects the Asian countries and was part of their heritage. And it has a tremendous continuity going back thousands of years. But at the same time, it has also always renewed itself and evolved over time. It is not simply fixed in the past. So what we had over the last 200 years is we had, of course, the independence of India, the independence movement and the awakening of India gradually, including to its own culture and civilization. At the same time, we had another parallel movement, which has been the expansion of the civilizational influence of India throughout the world. The pivotal point of that would be 1893 and Swami Vivekananda introducing yoga to the Western world. At the same time, he was awakening Vedanta and the Indic traditions within India. Now, this movement that spread all these teachings over time, yoga, Vedanta, practices like mantra, meditation, pranayama, and so forth, started from then, and it's interesting to note that it did not have any state support. It did not have any support of any group of missionaries or religious money behind it. It was the compelling influences of its own ideas. And here, we had then the independence of India. Now the independence of India, the independence movement was also very much rooted in this Bharatiya Sanskriti ethos. We had the connection to yoga now with Vivekananda, Tilak in the Gita, Mahatma Gandhi in the Gita, Sri Aurobindo as a great yogi. But after 1947, India really did not foster and promote its culture either inside the country or outside. I like to call soft power also cultural diplomacy and cultural influence. On the contrary, if we want to use dates, 1947, independence of India. 1976, India's constitution is now rewritten to say secular and socialist. And India's educational institutions, largely through JNU, are used to critique, negate, and deny India's civilizational ethos or Bharatiya Sanskriti, or even to reject any idea of India at all. And then we have the date of 2015, when Prime Minister Modi introduced International Yoga Day and brought about this new awakening of India as a cultural force, both inside the country and outside the country. And now with his cultural diplomacy, it's going on several levels. One is the spread of ideas, but even the diplomacy of the connections like the ASEAN members on Republic Day is a very good example of that. Now, what I want to look at in this short period of time is also how India's civilizational force has affected the world. We have yoga centers throughout the world. India's gurus have been traveling throughout the world and have hundreds of thousands and even millions of disciples in different countries. Hari Kiran has already mentioned how many of these teachings have influenced people. They've been at the cutting edge of science and medicine. They have also formed a kind of counterculture in the world today. Every country we go to has a cultural, countercultural group of people who are involved in Indic, Vedic, Buddhist meditation practices, so on. And you all know this very well. Now, this even occurs in countries where there's no diaspora from India. For example, in Brazil, we've seen it. It's very big in Russia, even though there is opposition at a religious level in Russia. In fact, Russia has one of the countries where there's the greatest amount of interest in Vedic, Hindu, Buddhist traditions, and so forth. And on top of this, this started happening in the 60s in the West, but it's continued to grow. And then in the 80s in the West, you had the growing diaspora of people from India into these different, particularly English-speaking countries of the world, and now establishing themselves as the most affluent and educated of groups there, and also building temples in the West and influencing the education. So the diaspora is also another type of soft power. One group we work with is Swami Narayan, which has built this, you should see this wonderful Akshardham temple in Delhi. We help them with that educational display. They're doing one in New Jersey, which will be larger. It's more than half done. And then a few years ago, we were in Canada. They had built one of these wonderful temples on the main road to the Toronto airport. And the people in Canada told us that that temple had a greater effect on raising the image of the Indian people in Canada than anything else that has been done. So these two communities are there. Now the interesting thing is, the sad thing is, a lot of the people from the West who study the Vedic, Hindu, Buddhist traditions, the Dharmic traditions for personal healing, for personal growth and development, have very little understanding of India politically. In fact, we are often so surprised how little they know, although they know a little bit more that Modi has come into power. Mainly they're connected to a guru or to a lineage or to a sampradaya. And we're trying to educate them. What is the Sanatana Dharma? What is the Bharatiya Sanskriti? Your particular guru and his lineage did not invent things originally. They came from a certain greater tradition. They were Shaivites, Vaishnavas, or they were into Tibetan Buddhism and all these things. So that community also needs to be educated, more connected to India. We also connect them. They're more connected now by tours and travels, and then also by the information media. For example, one of the more popular music forms coming up in America today is kirtan. And we also find they even have such things as Bhakti Fest coming up, where thousands of people get together to study and practice the Bhakti Yoga. And so we've seen that when we take this Bharatiya Sanskriti and repackage it in modern terms, which is what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi did, or Deepak Chopra did, or Paramahansa Yogananda did, it has an impact on the most forward, educated, affluent aspects of the society, like Steve Jobs, who carried Autobiography of a Yogi with him. That book has sold more than 5 million copies in the I think in the United States alone. and has influenced people in a very positive way. That particular audience is there, as well as the diaspora that we need to bring into the soft power, and also make them aware of India's economic, spiritual contributions, and really educate them as to the Dharmic traditions. So in that sense, I would say India has the greatest soft power. It has the greatest scope for cultural diplomacy, but the governments have not been promoting that well enough. Modi is doing a better job at that, but more needs to be done. Now, on top of that, there is a greater challenge. There is now basically a cultural war going on in India, and a cultural war going on throughout the world. In India, there's that cultural war targeting Hindu festivals, Supreme Court regulating Hindu temples. We all know what these particular problems are. The whole colonial assault, which was also a cultural war on India, is continuing under the guise of certain NGOs at times, certain leftist publications, missionary movements, Islamist movements, and so forth. India needs to exert its cultural strength both inside the country as well as outside the country, but it has a very compelling influence for that. And in that regard, the cultural diplomacy is also a very important cultural defense. And if we talk about even this idea of security, I would say we also have to consider protecting intellectual and cultural borders and national defense, of course, in the high-tech era where we also have the proliferation of the media, and we have the proliferation of potential cyber attacks, cyber wars, and the whole media thing. So in other words, the Indic cause has not been projected well enough into education and media in a general level, but the Indic influence is everywhere and needs to be brought up and integrated together. And we've been always promoting is the integration of all the Dharmic teachings and traditions worldwide. And not only India is developing and under siege the same way, it's true of particularly the smaller Buddhist countries, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, which have less cultural and political and also population support than India. Also the cause of the Tibetan Buddhism. So what we feel is that there needs to be a new, first of all, India has to be affirmed. It's a civilization. It's not just a part of Western civilization. It has its civilizational values. We know about ahimsa. All the civilizational values have to be brought out, including potential Indic critiques of Western civilization. We all know what Mahatma Gandhi said, that Western civilization would be a good idea. That was a tongue-in-cheek remark that he made. But we also have to have that sense of confidence, tradition, past, present, and future, strength within the Indian context, but also the ability to expand globally and bring together all of our Dharmic associates and friends. Dharma is also not an exclusive thing that rejects somebody because of their name or background. We always say you have to relate to every person as an individual. You should never relate to them simply by ethnicity, culture, religion, and all those things. Because as we come into this coming century, as Hari Kiran was already mentioning, the main progressive civilizational transformational trends are within this same Bharatiya or Dharmic ethos and need to be spread globally. So spreading India's cultural diplomacy is not just simply a matter of economics and politics, which is all very important. It's also a matter of ecology. It's also a matter not just of human rights, but of the rights of nature. It's the rights of family, the rights of community. It's not just a question of preserving biodiversity. It's also a question of preserving cultural diversity. So in that regard, this whole cultural diplomacy and spread of Indian culture, I think is one of the most important trends. And everyone who is in the diplomatic service should learn the basics of the Indic civilization, its relevance, what is happening, and also become an ambassador of that great civilizational ethos, as well as someone willing to be innovative and take it forward to another century. Namaste.